Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be cracking open a really influential book, The Innovator's Dilemma.
Oh, yeah, this is a classic.
It's by Clayton M. Christensen. And we're going to try to answer the question, like, how can successful companies, companies that are doing all the right things,
Yeah.
totally stumble when new technologies come along? And we're using the book itself as our source for this deep dive. So, ready to dive in?
Let's do it. Christensen uses all these examples from history, like, disk drives and excavators,
Yeah, it's a fascinating read.
and even steel, to try to show why some companies that are really doing everything right just fail when new tech comes along.
Yeah, it's almost like they fall victim to their own success, right?
It really is.
But, like, how does that even make sense?
Well, that's the heart of what he calls, the innovator's dilemma.
Right.
And it's not about companies being bad. It's more about these kind of inherent challenges in navigating disruptive innovations.
Okay, so like navigating a river, right?
Yeah, think of it like that.
They're going with the flow of the market.
Exactly. Companies follow these currents.
Yeah.
They make good products better
Yeah.
for their customers. And those are what Christensen calls sustaining innovations.
Okay, so that makes sense. Like making a faster hard drive or a more powerful excavator.
Yeah, just building on what's already working.
Okay, got it.
But then sometimes you get what he calls a disruptive innovation. So it's something that might be inferior to what people already have, but offers other advantages, like being cheaper or simpler to use.
Yeah, so like when MP3 players came out, they didn't hold as many songs as the CD,
Right.
but they were smaller and easier to use.
Exactly. And what's interesting is Christensen says those disruptive innovations can create totally new markets. It's almost like they're carving a new path in that river.
Okay, I like that. Like they're changing the direction of the river.
Exactly.
So then why would an established company struggle to follow that new path? I mean, aren't they supposed to be the innovators?
Well, remember we talked about those value networks.
Mm-hmm.
So companies are embedded in these networks of, suppliers and customers.
They're partners, they're competitors.
Exactly, competitors too. And that shapes like their cross and profits. But also, it really influences what innovations they even consider in the first place.
Yeah, it's like their DNA, right?
Yeah, it really shapes how they see the world. And so a company that's used to making high-end products with big profit margins, it might struggle to embrace something disruptive that's targeting a lower-end market because, the margins might be smaller. It goes against, like, their whole business model.
Right.
Imagine asking, like, a luxury car manufacturer to suddenly start making budget-friendly compacts.
Right.
It just wouldn't work.
They'd be starting from scratch.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The infrastructure, the brand, even their mindset just wouldn't be suited for it.
Yeah. So they're almost like stuck in a gilded cage of their own making, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And Christensen gives some really compelling examples of this happening in the real world, like with Seagate.
Oh, yeah, the hard drive company.
They were the leader in 5.25-inch hard drives, but they missed this huge opportunity because they were so focused on serving their existing customers.
Right. They missed the 3.5-inch drive.
Exactly. The ones that made laptops possible, they just didn't see the PC market taking off like it did.
Right. And Bucyrus Erie, right?
Yeah. The excavator company, the kings of cable-actuated excavator.
Right. Table actuated.
And they totally fumbled their entry into hydraulic excavators because they just kept trying to adapt the new tech to their old products.
Instead of going after new markets with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. So even these giants, they can really stumble when they don't see the potential of disruptive innovations. But wait a minute, like, wouldn't listening to your customers help you avoid that?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
One of the most, I think, surprising arguments Christensen makes is that doing all the right things that we're always told to do,
Yeah.
like listening to your customers, investing in what's profitable.
Being efficient with your resources.
Right, being efficient. Those can actually blind you to disruptive innovation.
Okay, now my head's spinning. How can doing the right thing lead to failure?
Because usually customers, they just want small improvements. They don't want something totally different.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And companies, they're naturally drawn to, the investments that promise the highest returns,
Right.
which usually means focusing on your core profitable markets.
So it's almost like this inertia builds up, right?
Exactly.
It's hard to break out of it.
And even if a leader in the company is aware of something disruptive, the company's structure and processes might just steer them away from it.
So they might miss that opportunity.
Yeah, it's like they can't even see it. And Christensen tells this great story about a student in his class. The student works at Honda. And he finds out that Honda is using this tiny, like 1.8-inch hard drive in their navigation systems.
Wait a minute, this sounds familiar.
Right. Just before that, the CEO of like a major hard drive company, he told Christensen that there was absolutely no market for a drive that small. Like they just couldn't see it because it didn't fit with their current customers and profit models.
So there was a market for it.
Yeah, but they were totally blind to it.
They were missing out on a whole new opportunity.
Exactly. It's like the things that make a company strong can become its weaknesses when it comes to disruptive change.
That is a really big takeaway.
Yeah, it is.
But surely there must be some way to avoid this, right?
Well, that's what we'll be getting into in part 2. Christensen actually outlined some strategies
Oh, okay, good.
for companies to like avoid becoming a victim to this whole innovator's dilemma. And it's not just about being aware of the problem, it's about taking action.
This is already giving me a lot to think about. I can't wait to hear about the strategies.
Yeah.
Join us for part 2 of our deep dive into the innovator's dilemma, where we're going to explore those solutions in more detail. Welcome back to the deep dive. So in part 1, we talked about how companies can get blindsided by these disruptive innovations.
Yeah, it's tricky stuff.
But now I really want to unpack, what are some of the strategies that we can learn from Christensen's book to actually combat this dilemma, right?
Right. And, one thing to keep in mind is that while disruptive innovations can be like a threat, they can also be amazing opportunities.
Okay, so how can companies shift their thinking to see the opportunity instead of just, getting caught off guard?
One of the big things that Christensen recommends is setting up independent units or even spin-offs to specifically go after these disruptive innovations. It's like giving them their own space to operate.
Okay.
With their own kind of like startup energy.
Yeah, it's like you're saying, instead of turning a giant cargo ship, you're launching a speedboat.
Exactly. And Christensen actually gives this example of Quantum, the hard drive company.
Right.
They navigated a bunch of different disruptive waves by basically creating these independent units. It's almost like they built a portfolio of businesses, each one tailored to a specific market.
Yeah, so it's not one size fits all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just for tech companies either.
Okay.
Christensen talks about how HP, like Hewlett-Packard,
Right.
they use this approach to develop their inkjet printer business, which, eventually ended up kind of challenging their own laserjet business.
So they were competing with themselves almost.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what it takes to really stay ahead of the curve, right?
Exactly. And another important thing is matching the size of the organization to the size of the opportunity.
Right.
Right. So if you have this huge company making billions of dollars, a market opportunity that's, worth a few million might not seem that interesting, even if it's something disruptive.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's like trying to move a mountain with a teaspoon.
Right. The effort wouldn't seem worth it.
Exactly. Even if that teaspoon is scooping up, something really valuable.
Yeah.
And there's this example Christensen gives about Control Data, this hard drive company. They were having trouble adapting to the smaller drives that PCs needed.
Right.
They finally figured out they needed this separate unit with its own cost structure and culture to really tackle this emerging market.
So it couldn't be business as usual, right?
No, not at all.
It had to be different.
And another big thing is embracing experimentation and learning.
Okay.
Disruptive markets are full of uncertainty.
Right.
So it's impossible to plan everything perfectly up front.
It's like navigating uncharted waters.
Exactly. And Christensen gives this example of Honda going into the U.S. motorcycle market.
Oh, yeah.
And people often think it was this brilliantly planned strategy.
Right.
But their success really came from adapting and learning as they went along.
Okay.
So it wasn't about having this perfect plan. It was about being agile.
Being able to respond.
Yeah. So they actually started with small motorcycles, which were seen as kind of toys in the U.S. at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But then they gradually moved up market as they learned more about the market.
So they found their niche. They figured out where to go.
Exactly.
So all this talk about companies adapting, evolving, how does that relate to us as individuals, right? In our own careers? Can the principles of the innovator's dilemma help us?
Oh, absolutely. Just like companies, individuals can also get trapped.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
By becoming too specialized.
Right.
Or too attached to one way of doing things.
Right. So set in your ways.
Yeah. And it's what Christensen calls performance oversupply.
Okay. That's interesting.
So think about early cell phones.
Yeah.
Right? The big clunky ones.
Yeah. Exactly. Terrible battery life. But they got the job done. You can make a call.
Right.
As technology got better, cell phones got smaller,
Uh-huh.
more reliable, better battery life.
Right.
Eventually, they, surpassed what most people needed just to make a phone call, right?
So they were almost too good.
It's kind of like when a company keeps improving a product beyond what the market demands.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying.
And that creates this opening for something simpler and cheaper.
Right.
Think about flip phones.
Yeah.
And then smartphones. They weren't necessarily better than those super high-end cell phones, but they were good enough.
Right.
And they were cheaper and more stylish.
Yeah. So they disrupted the market by appealing to a different set of priorities.
Exactly. And it brings up this interesting question for individuals.
Yeah.
Are you overshooting the needs of your current role or your market?
That's a really good question.
You're investing in skills that are just beyond what's really required, Yeah, because we're always told to be,
Right.
improving ourselves, getting better, learning more.
Right.
But maybe that's not always the answer.
Exactly. So it's important to be mindful of this, pitfall.
Okay.
And ask yourself, could I be disrupted by someone who could do 80% of what I do at 20% of the cost?
Right. It's good, finding that balance between, excellence and efficiency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just like companies creating these spin-offs, individuals might need to create their own, personal spin-offs.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
It's like creating those little speedboats we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But for our own careers, giving us that flexibility to experiment, explore new directions.
Right. Cultivating that entrepreneurial mindset, even if you're, working for somebody else.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So going back to Christensen's point about, performance oversupply?
Yeah.
So this can create opportunities for disruption in, unexpected places.
Right. It's not just about, brand new technologies or products. It's also about existing solutions becoming too much,
Too complex.
Yeah, too complex. Or exceeding what the market actually needs.
Okay, so exceeding the need, going beyond what people actually want.
Exactly. And, this ties back to one of the main points about disruptive innovation. It's about offering something simpler, more accessible.
Right.
Even if it's not as fancy as what's already out there.
Yeah.
Think about what happened with, discount retailers.
Oh, yeah.
Like Walmart or Target.
They came in and changed the game.
They didn't offer the same level of service as those department stores, but they had a wider range of stuff at lower prices, and people loved it.
Yeah, they appealed to a whole new audience, right?
Yeah. And that forced those old department stores to either, adapt or risk getting left behind.
It's amazing how, what seems like a small trend at first can become this huge disruption, right?
Absolutely.
So it really highlights how important it is to recognize and adapt to these shifts, right? For companies and individuals.
For both. It's not just about staying ahead of the curve. It's about understanding how the curve itself is changing.
Right, because the goalposts are always moving.
Exactly. And this requires a little bit of humility,
Okay.
and a willingness to challenge what you think you know.
Be open to new ideas.
Yeah, even if they challenge, your expertise. And that's where Christensen's work is so valuable. It's not about predicting the future exactly.
Right.
It's about recognizing these patterns.
The underlying dynamics.
Exactly. The dynamics that drive innovation and then adapting your strategy.
So it's giving us a toolkit, right?
Yeah.
To thrive in this world of constant change.
Exactly. And that's why this book is still so relevant today, because it gives us these timeless principles that help us navigate this world of innovation that's always changing.
Absolutely.
In business and in our lives.
Well, this has been such a fascinating deep dive into the innovator's dilemma. We've talked about what disruptive innovation is, how it plays out in all these different industries, and even how it applies to our own careers. We've seen how companies can become victims of their own success, how small trends can cause these huge disruptions, and most importantly, how to actually deal with these challenges. So to wrap things up, I want to leave you with this. What are the disruptive innovations that are coming up in your field, in your industry?
Yeah, think about that.
And how are you going to prepare for them?
Are you going to be the disruptor or are you going to be disrupted?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And we really encourage you to, check out The Innovator's Dilemma yourself, dig deeper into these questions. It's a book that'll challenge your thinking and give you some really valuable insights for navigating this crazy world of innovation.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.